Hello and welcome to the Project Good podcast. I'm your host, Anne-Marie Hilton. Project Good is a social impact podcast interviewing experts and advocates about the pressing problems that we face globally and hearing how they suggest we move forward in the future. The Project Good podcast is brought to you by Project Good Work. The goal of this podcast is to inspire people and organizations to develop a mindset that can move others to positive action regarding the complex social issues facing people on the planet. For July, we're focusing on Economy of the Future. Today, I have the pleasure of interviewing Dr. Vogel, Associate Professor of Economics at the University of California, San Diego. Dr. Vogel's research focuses on development, demographics, health, human capital, and the political economy. He has published a number of articles looking at economies in developing countries. His most recent article, Intergenerational Associations and the Fertility Transition, look at generational achievement in families and the changing social climate we face. First, let me introduce our guest, Dr. Vogel, Associate Professor of Economics at the University of California, San Diego. Dr. Vogel's research focuses on development, demographics, health, human capital, and the political economy. His current courses that he teaches at the university focuses on applied econometrics and data analysis and macroeconomics of development. Welcome, Dr. Vogel.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you. So before we get into the questions, I always like to ask everybody a little bit of personal information. So what drove you to focus on and study economics?
I grew up in a household with a father who was a doctor, a single doctor in his own practice, and my mother was the business manager of his practice. And so dinner conversations in my household always revolved around health insurance and Medicare in particular. And so when I took my first economics course in college, which happened to be taught by a famous health economist, it really took my interest.
Okay, that's cool. And so did you always decide that you wanted to go the educational and research route, or was that just something that happened?
I guess by the end of being an undergrad, I had sort of figured out that research was something I enjoyed doing, although I hadn't fully committed to what kind of research I wanted to do. So I mean, at the beginning of being an undergraduate, I had no idea that one could spend one's time doing what I do today. But by the end, I had a better idea.
Okay. Yeah, sometimes I find that people after they've tested things around the world, that they find their niche or where is the best place for them.
Yeah.
Okay, so as you know that we are looking at the economy of the future, and right now, obviously, for a lot of people, 2020 was, I guess I'll use the cliche word, unprecedented, and knocked a lot of people off their rockers. And so now, of course, the question is for everybody is how do we move forward? What is the new world, or what is, as everybody's calling it, the new normal going to look like? So I guess the first question, and I think, people, of course, because they were living it, but obviously once we live things, especially when I'll just say we all went through trauma. So when we live in trauma, we all become, I would say, tunnel vision a little bit, and we can only see what's in front of us, and everything else really doesn't matter. And in a way, I guess I don't want to say we become selfish, but in a way we do, because we're all just thinking about survival. Yep. So in a general sense, what would you say, how did COVID impact the economy?
Well, so I guess, back in March and April, when everything shut down, there was a big disruption in people's day-to-day lives, right? You couldn't go out for services anymore. Going to the grocery store became a risky endeavor. In general, people couldn't get together with friends and family. Childcare was shut down. Education was shut down, right? So that was a really big shock. And everybody knew that unprecedented shock was going to eventually dissipate, right? And so there were sort of two things that went on. One is that, as people had to reorganize their lives during that, very drastic shutdown back in March and April, they changed their demand for various economic goods and services, right? So, you weren't going out to get a haircut anymore. You weren't going out to restaurants anymore, but you were, ordering sweatpants to sit in front of your desk as I'm doing right now, right? So the bigger question beyond that is sort of like how much of that was going to stick and how quickly were we going to bounce back from that. I think the bouncing back has been a little slower than it could have been if this country had been more proactive in controlling the virus early on, and you can see that from several Asian countries which have been able to return to something more normal more quickly than we have. But it has been happening gradually, especially now that we're vaccinating people.
I guess this is going to be a twofold question, but how is the U.S. economy doing, and are we going to recover, do you think, in 2021?
Well, so in some sense, the U.S. economy is doing better than many expected. So I guess the IMF is projecting something like 6% GDP growth in 2021. Which is a very high rate of GDP growth. Of course, there was a huge contraction last year, so we're starting from a lower base than usual. But that's pretty good. And the unemployment rate was up to 15% at the height of the crisis, and is now back down to 6%, which is not quite as low as it was before. Before, like back in last winter, we were less than 4% unemployment rate, right? So there's still a gap there, and of course that gap is unequally distributed, and the remaining gap is probably going to take a while to eat away at, right? Because at the start, back when we were at 15% unemployment, a lot of those workers were furloughed workers or workers that were probably going to be recalled by their previous employers, something like that, if they were unemployed. And a lot of that has happened already. So, as the unemployment rate has fallen, the share of the unemployed who are probably going to remain unemployed for a while has increased.
Now, I guess for the future employment, because this is, I guess, different and similar to what happened during the Great Recession. But one of the things that is always, hidden are the people who are either not looking for work or have given up. Do you think then is the unemployment rate higher than what's been being reported, or do you think it's about accurate?
Yeah, so you're right that there are people who have dropped out of the labor force. I guess if we measure things in terms of number of jobs or number of people employed, we went from something like 150 million and lost 20 million jobs. And we've to 130 million. Since then, we've climbed back up to about 145 million. So we're still, 7 to 8 million employed people below the peak. And of course, there's been some population growth since then. So we have some ground to make up still.
I guess with this ground to make up, and I know one of the the biggest hit populations during all of this, just because of the closure of daycares and schools and everything, were women. Mm-hmm. What would you say? For workers in the future, or just in the current even economy, what advice would you give them to prepare for being able to, survive? I guess.
Can I pause on that question because you brought up women? And if I forget about the question you just asked, please ask it to me again. But I do want to. It is something that I thought of in my previous answer. I thought of bringing up how you mentioned that there are some similarities with what happened back in 2008, 2009. A big difference is the gender composition of job losses, right? Mm-hmm. This is the first recession in modern U.S. history, I guess, in all of U.S. history, because earlier U.S. history, female labor force participation wasn't that high. But this is basically the first recession that has hit women more than men, right? Mm-hmm. So job losses were concentrated in service sectors, and that in itself would bias the job losses more towards women than in past recessions when manufacturing or construction lost work. And then on top of that, families were burdened by a whole lot more childcare responsibilities, which in our society, the way it's structured today, tends to fall on women more than on men, right? So this is a recession that has really burdened women much more than it's burdened men. And I think a big question moving forward is how much of that is going to stick, right? So how many women who stopped working and took care of their kids are going to stay out of the labor force for the rest of their potential working lives, and how many of them are going to make their way back in once the school and childcare infrastructure returns to how it was before. And I guess related to that is the question of, is the childcare, is the network of childcare centers and the network of support going to return to what it was before? I think the childcare sector tends to be slower to build back to where it was than some other sectors in the economy. So that's something that I worry about.
Yes.
Now you asked how should families plan for the future. I guess you're thinking about families that were already set up and not young people who are thinking about how to equip themselves for the future. The young people trying to equip themselves for the future and investing in skills and so on. I think I have more to say about. For families, I think families have learned a lot about how to navigate uncertainty and to juggle lots of things. I think certainly the government could now, with the knowledge of how this whole past year plus rolled out, I think government programs could be set up that could ease some of the blow for families, right? Better planning for schools, better planning for switches to remote learning if necessary. More organization for how we just switch to safe childcare when needed, and so on.
I guess one of the things, this is a little bit of a same, but starting to switch a little bit. For right now, one of the big things that people started talking about because of this loss in maybe their partner having to stay home, it's adding to the rise in income inequality. What do you think? Will there be, I guess, a middle class in the future, or what will that look like? It's been even before we had this, pandemic happen.
Yeah, it's a long-term trend, right? So income inequality has been rising in the U.S. since the 1970s, and the middle class has been getting hollowed out, right? And this current recession hasn't really helped that situation. Stock market portfolios have continued to do very well, and people at the top of the income distribution have had much smaller increases in unemployment. So in general, the top of the income distribution hasn't done too badly over the last year, whereas the middle and bottom of the income distribution have had a tough time. And so, yeah, that's something that I worry about too. Again, I think that for a lot of these questions, right, for thinking about inequality, or for thinking about, before you brought up the labor force and non-participation in the labor force, right, there are longer term trends that preceded the pandemic, right, that labor force participation was declining among men, and inequality was rising. But if anything, the pandemic makes those trends worse, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's true. We've we see. Definitely saw it with people doing all the protesting and everything, almost everything in daily in the news. And I was researching something else, and I guess because of the inequality, and then also I think it's also being pent up, because I don't think humans are meant to be pent up for long. Mm-hmm. We've been seeing people, even violence and everything rising, and people are a lot angrier than they have ever been before. And so, with this, do you think that that America as a global economic power itself is declining, or is that just, or are we just experiencing a moment?
So, the U.S. is still by far the largest economy in the world. I guess the sort of thinking about other economies rising. There certainly are other parts of the world that are developing economically. China is the most prominent example, right? I'm not sure if the rise of China means that the U.S. Will be less important in world affairs or in the global economy. But certainly, I guess the future holds a shared stage for the U.S. rather than just this sole center for the world economy.
And then this is just a follow-up question that, and I'm asking this mostly because a lot of people, this is a concern for people that have been reading and media. Would you say that the dollar is going to stay solid, or do you think another currency will be taking its place?
Yeah, so this is outside my wheelhouse. I'm happy to answer, but it's not particularly my area of expertise. But when I hear discussions like this, I sort of try to think, well, what candidate is going to replace the dollar as the global currency, and it's not particularly clear to me, right? I guess when China switches to purchasing government debt from another country instead of the U.S. as its safe asset option, then we can start talking about other currencies replacing the dollar as sort of the go-to currency in world markets. But I don't really see any signs of that happening.
Okay, great. That should put people at rest a little bit. I think a lot of people, especially when tragedies like this, everybody goes into the worst case scenario. Let's see. If I'm going to kind of switch it and take it back to like a more personal level for people to relate to, since people are staying home more, what do you think are going to be the main drivers of personal spending?
So I guess, I can comment on what happened over the last year to personal spending. And then we can sort of think about what that means for the future, I guess. Because thinking about the future is also going to involve thinking about what's actually going to happen to people going to work or staying at home from here forward, right? But so when things started shutting down, people started staying home from work back in the middle of last year. Expenditures on food went up, expenditures on alcohol went up a ton, and that's actually one of the most persistent things. Of course, people spend more on online shopping, and in general, there's been less spending on services, hair cutting, that sort of thing, and also less on travel and hotels and on gasoline, right? Now, I'm not sure how much of that is going to stick because, as more and more people are vaccinated and as worries about infection and about contributing to contagion go away, people are going to, start going to the hairdresser again. Although I learned to cut my own hair, so I'm not sure. I don't have much hair, so it's not that hard. But in general, people are going to go back to the hairdresser and they're going to start traveling again, right? Insofar as the economic growth gives them the resources to do so, right? The changing purchasing habits for types of clothing, and maybe for more cooking at home and eating at home, that might stick. And also the retail shopping had been declining for a while. This was a huge additional negative shock to the retail sector, and so this might be a permanent boost in the online shopping sector. Yeah. So I guess going forward, a lot depends. So let's assume, maybe it's too much of an assumption, but let's assume that the progress against the virus continues, right? So that by this time next year, maybe at least in the U.S., we won't be burdened by worrying about contagion. Then the question is going to be sort of how much does this stay-at-home set of practices continue, or do we return to normal? Do we return to what we had before? I guess not normal.
Yes. Do you think this the work from home will become the new normal?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think there's a lot of heterogeneity in whether work from home works for people, right? And there's actually some nice evidence from a large travel agency in China. This is pre-pandemic. That allowed some workers to work from home, and they did it in a way that emulated a randomized control trial. So some researchers could compare the workers who, of the workers who signed up for work from home, sort of a random subset of them were allowed to work from home, and the others weren't. And productivity went up in the workers who got to work from home. So these were workers who wanted to work from home and got to, right? And then productivity went up even further when some of those workers were allowed to return to the office if they wanted to, right? So everybody tried it. Everybody who wanted to tried it, and on average, they got more productive. And for something like an online travel agency or a phone-based travel agency, you can measure productivity by counting how many calls somebody went through a day, right? If they're in the call center part of the firm, right? So all these things are straightforward to measure in this type of a company. And so, let's just focus on the call center worker example, right? So people went home, and on average, the people working from home increased the number of calls they did a day. So that was a good thing. Some of them realized that working from home didn't actually work that well for them. So when they were allowed to return to the office, and the others who wanted to keep working at home were allowed to keep working from home, then you saw an even larger boost in productivity, right? Because some people tried it and realized this isn't working for me. I do much better in the office. Some people tried it and realized it worked well for them, and so they do much better at home, right? And so overall, I guess the company benefited from offering that flexibility to people, right? And I think there's a broader lesson here for companies in this post-pandemic world. There might be a drive to having more flexibility, to allowing people to work from home occasionally if it works better for their lives. And there's good evidence, at least from some settings, that it can result in increased productivity, right? But I don't think it's going to work for everybody, and I don't expect that the average firm is going to make working from home the normal for all its employees. That's sort of my guess. I guess there's a separate issue, which is that a call center is a place where you have sort of a defined task that you're supposed to complete, and you can do it quicker or less quick, or you can pick up the phone more quickly or less quickly, and sort of thinking about productivity in that setting is very different from thinking about productivity in a setting where people are coming up with new ideas or trying to collaborate on a new project or something like that, right? And so I suspect that in idea-based industries, or even in services that rely on people interacting with each other, you could get a boost in productivity for some time, maybe for this past year, right? Mm-hmm. Where you're basically relying on existing projects you were working on, or existing networks that you had already, right? Networks of people to exchange ideas, I'm thinking of. But at some point, that's going to get harder and harder to do without new opportunities to interact with people in person, I think. So for the ideas economy, I think it remains to be seen whether doing everything from home with each person in autarky, each person sort of on his or her own island, right, is going to help move forward ideas at the same pace that we saw before the pandemic.
Yes. So I guess would you say that the ideal type, like one of the big things that people think about, or now that we talked about, or in the media, the big thing was celebrating. I think you probably, I don't know if you go on Google regularly, most people do, but everybody was celebrating the essential workers. Mm-hmm. And so would you say in the future, in this case, obviously during the pandemic, they kept everything going for all of us. Would you say in the future, those are the type of workers that are going to fuel the economy, or do you think that we're going to have a whole different type of workers and economy? I know it's hard to know.
So I'm struggling a little bit with the idea of fueling the economy. So I guess for sure, the essential workers who kept things moving, both essential workers include healthcare workers, and they include the childcare workers who put themselves at risk. They include the delivery drivers who kept goods moving to people when people needed them. They are, a bedrock of the economy. I'm not sure that I would say, so when I think of fueling the economy, I think of propelling it forward. Yes. And that makes me think of growth, right?
Yes, I guess I should have, I guess I should have said, because mostly for the U.S. economy, I guess they always say small business is the one that is fueling the economy. So I guess would you say that still having small businesses, and then I guess if we're looking at a small business, if we think that's how it's going to go in the future, I guess what type of businesses are going to contribute to the growth of the economy?
Yeah, so I think the longer term growth tends to come from people coming up with new ideas or new ways of organizing things, right? And so, in the past couple of decades, a lot of that has come from technology, and I suspect that will continue to be the case, especially now if we think that, we may have new pandemics that have similar features to the one we've experienced over the past year, right? There are going to be a number, we've seen a number of new technology issues arise in this last year. Some of them we've met already, right? We're all video conferencing and doing podcasts over the internet and that kind of thing, right? But a number of them maybe haven't been perfected yet. And so finding the right technologies to fuel this sort of remote type, not just the work, but also the conferencing and the interactions between people and so on, I think is going to play an important role in the future.
Okay. And now to switch to a totally different topic, but I think something that hopefully is in your wheelhouse a little bit, looking at how the discussion of climate change will affect, I guess, the world economies and developing countries in the future.
Yeah, so I think it's kind of bleak. So this is a long-term trend, whereas the COVID recession that we've been discussing until now has some long-term features, but in some sense has been a short-term crisis, right? And so the long-term for climate change is going to be hotter. It's going to involve a lot more uncertainty about storms and about heat waves and so on. And it's going to involve a bunch of land that is currently above water being underwater. And so, all of that is going to present a bunch of different challenges. The world getting warmer is going to present some productivity issues. There's very solid evidence that workers in a range of industries, in a range of job roles, become less productive when it's hotter, right? And so you can mitigate some of that with air conditioning, although some of the work has to be outdoors. And of course, relying heavily on air conditioning worsens our carbon emissions problem. But then apart from the heat itself, there's uncertainty, right? There's uncertainty about what's going to happen to the weather tomorrow, about how we prepare for a big flooding event or a big heat wave event or wildfires or something like that. And then, yeah, you know, the part of the, you know, it's pretty clear that there are going to be low-lying areas close to the ocean that are going to be underwater, and that's going to require a whole lot of reorganization of the economy.
And so this is a big question, but maybe you have I'm sure you probably have thought about it, but for countries that are developing, and because I believe they're going to get hit worse than countries obviously that already have stable economies when this happens. I guess one of the things that I'm sure you've heard about the UN's pact to do all these different things by 2030. I guess how would you say for these developing countries, how can we start to, I guess, help them, or what are I don't know if there's any way we can help them. It's such a big problem. It's intimidating. So.
This is not always a particularly politically popular thing to say in rich countries, but you know, one of the biggest things that we can do to help people who are in poorer countries is to allow them to move to better opportunities. So that's certainly something, right? So that's certainly something that would help, you know, people from poor places in general, and in particular people who are living in places that are suffering the consequences of climate change, right? Moving away from the places that are being hit by climate change towards places that are less feeling the effects of climate change is you know, one easy one relatively straightforward, I shouldn't say easy, way to mitigate those consequences, right?
Yes, I would say logical.
Yes.
Yeah. No, I understand. Like, okay, if it's if the wave's coming, get out of the way. Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And you know, so let me move it actually a little closer to home here in California. You know, I have a colleague at another University of California campus who has been working on a project for the governor to try to help understand how California can better cope with the future of climate change, right? And actually, you know, I just know this informally from him. I haven't seen a report. I think, you know, the report has been sitting on the governor's desk for a while, but he's had lots of other things to think about over the last year. But informally, one of the things that came out of it was that, you know, a lot of the gain, you know, a lot of what California can do to try to mitigate the future effects of climate change and to try to reduce its carbon emissions is to, you know, build more housing close to the coast, because the climate is, you know, it's less close to wildfire risk, and the climate is less requiring of air conditioning and all the other things that we do to keep comfortable further away from the coast, right? Anyway, so that's just one example that moving people around can help a lot with a range of these issues. But you know, moving people around itself, it entails trauma, it entails economic costs, and so that wouldn't be so easy either, right? I guess, you know, from the climate change prevention point of view, we can also do more to combat carbon emissions, right? That hasn't gone super well so far, but who knows what the future will hold.
Yes, I guess within that future, a previous discussion, just because this is, I guess Earth Day is in 2 days. I guess, is there, this is probably a little bit out of your wheelhouse too, but in those areas, because I I don't know, since we've been losing people, I don't know what the actual number is. I know we're billions of people on the planet, but I forget what the number is now since
About
we
7.
lost some this last year, but I guess it's still around 7. So, that obviously is a lot of people if we wanted to just move them. Are there, ways within those countries? One of the things that I've read about are trying to get people to start doing green jobs. Do you think that is actually realistic, or is not realistic? Is that even a further stretch than just moving the people?
Well, so the green jobs idea may be viable, say within the U.S., right? Mm-hmm. But if we want to think about where this global population problem is going to be most present, say in the next 50 years, this actually is in my wheelhouse. Mm-hmm. Africa is just burgeoning demographically. It's going to be a bigger and bigger part of the world population as we move into the future, right? And actually, by the end of the century, it's going to be the most populous. Sub-Saharan Africa is going to be the most populous region in the world, in the way that UN defines regions. So that would separate out parts of Asia, like East Asia and South Asia, and so on. Right? Mm-hmm. But anyway, Africa has much more population growth in its future than other parts of the world do, and Africa has lots of people who are engaged in agriculture, right? It's not entirely clear to me how you move people in agriculture, in low tech agriculture, into something like the green economy. That sounds very challenging to me. For sure, there are lots of people trying to invest in agricultural technology in Africa, and to move people to higher earning activities and also more sustainable activities. But it is a real challenge.
So you would say the easiest solution is just to move the people. I
guess no. I think we can do a few things at once, right? One thing is that we can work on our emissions problems. Another thing is that we can allow more freedom of movement. Right now, we really do not have a lot of freedom of movement, so we can allow for some more freedom of movement. And by no means do I think it's easy. Right?
Yes. No, that's why I was saying I was overwhelmed by the problem, because that's why I was saying how many people there are currently. Yeah.
And we can also work on improving access to better technology, say in agriculture, and we can also work on equipping people with more education, right? So investing more in kids, so that they can thrive when they grow up, wherever they end up being, either at home or in a new country that they've migrated to.
So. These are obviously, we just talked about some pretty big issues and ideas, and I guess the climate will be our new pandemic, but unfortunately that one's I think much bigger than the virus, literally and sorry, a little cheesy joke. I guess then for the future. Especially for the people who are young right now, I believe, just because I mentioned I just had a baby, I believe that they'll be looking at maybe a completely different world. Would you say that for young people, we'll talk about young people probably that are in their 20s right now, because that's easy. How would you say that they should prepare for, the future in regards to the job market and planning for, and this is something I'm just going to say, you can correct me if I'm wrong. It seems that there's always ups and downs, obviously, in life, but it seems that possibly that we could be in a continuous cycle in the U.S. of going up, extreme highs and extreme lows in smaller increments than before. I don't know. Do you think that we'll be in extreme highs and extreme lows in smaller increments than before? And I'm basing this only on we've had a great recession. We had obviously we couldn't stop. There was 9/11. There was a great recession. Now we have a pandemic, and we're having big hits in small times.
So so the Great Recession was bigger than previous recessions, right? Anything since the Great Depression, and this one was certain. This crisis has certainly been big. The frequency of these events has not sped up. The period between the Great Recession and the current recession was the longest expansion in U.S. history, right? So it doesn't seem like this is necessarily happening, that these business cycles are happening at a faster rate than they happened before. Whether the volatility, whether the size of these crises is going to continue to increase, that's interesting to think about. I don't really know the evidence on that, but that as far as your question about how young people should think about preparing themselves, I think the advice that most academic economists would give would be similar to what they would tell young people at any point in the last few decades, which is that investing in skills and diverse skills and general skills that can be applied to a number of say industries or a number of technologies, right, or that make one quick to learn new tools and new ideas, will help a lot in this future labor market, right? That as one industry gets, suppose you're working in the travel industry and it got hammered really badly over this last year, the ability to take a general set of skills and apply them in a different part of the economy becomes really, really useful, right? And that's actually one of the key ways that economists think about education, about what education does. It gives you a flexibility to keep up with technological change and adapt to these crises, right, and get through them with these flexible skills.
Okay. Wonderful. Thank you. Well, thank you, Dr. Vogel, for your time and insight. If you'd like to learn more about Dr. Vogel, you can read his latest research articles at tomvogel.com. Thank you once again. And so if you have a passion for serving an unserved community, a social justice problem, or simply want to change minds, contact Project Good Work at projectgood.work to start your project of change today. Thank you to our listeners for tuning in to Project Good, where we are focused on what matters.